Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I am your host, Matt Duraldi, alongside with my co-host, Trevor Scott.
How's it going, guys?
And a special guest today, his brother, Gavin Scott.
How's it going? Thanks for having me, you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Wanted to bring you on because you guys are both Packers fans. In today's episode, we're going to be running through the four Packers wide receivers who are, obviously going to be quite a large topic of conversation heading into the draft, who to draft whom where, so on and so forth. So what we're going to do is a little bit of a back and forth. We're going to go through each guy. These guys are going to give some of the pros, some of the cons, where we think you should be drafting.
All right, and my top receiver of the group is Jayden Reed. And I think that, or you see that he was going 71 in ADP here. So he's easily being drafted the top receiver of this group. And I think it's earned. Like, as a rookie, he had 10 total touchdowns. He had 8 receiving touchdowns. You see his stat line there of 64, 793, and 8. And he finishes wide receiver 23. But he also did this last year on a very low snap count. He really did not play that many snaps overall in his rookie year. And so, when he has multiple games below 50 and almost all of his games below 70% of the snaps, I think that leaves a lot to be desired in terms of potential targets. And, on his target percentage per route run was very high last year. And he even towards the end of the year, right, when they played Minnesota in week 17, he got hurt in like the second quarter, but he had already had 6 for 90 and 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. So, he was really coming into his own towards the end of the year, starting to get to play a little bit more towards the end of the year. And I expect him to build on that season going into year 2. So I'm really high on Jayden Reed. I know that they have a lot of competition, and I think competition really is the only reason he's getting pushed down into, the 8th round of 10-team standard or 10-team PPR leagues, non-Superflex leagues. But in Superflex, you can get him around pick 80, 90 even. Overall, I just am a really big fan of the talent here, and I think he's a really explosive player.
I know I'm supposed to be saying the negatives about Jayden Reed, but it's tough to say any negatives. He's their second round pick. Traditionally the Packers, with their second round picks, typically they have elevated talents in the second round, and everyone kind of laments about, okay, well, why won't the Packers draft a receiver in the first round? Well, you look at their track record with Jordy Nelson, you look at Devontae Adams, both of those guys were second round picks. And so now you have 2 receivers as second round picks. You got Jayden Reed, who was a second round pick in 2023. And then you get Christian Watson, who was also a second round pick in 2022. It's very interesting what the Packers are doing with receiver. I mean, they've got 4 guys that legitimately could be number 1 receivers. It's very interesting to me that Christian Watson kind of not taking that next step yet is really allowing kind of this conversation about Jayden Reed and these other 2 receivers that we're going to get into.
Yeah, lots to be optimistic about. And, like both of you guys, I'm really high on Jayden Reed. Just looking at his route tree, it's a lot of green, except for maybe, the 9 route. But I think one thing that was kind of interesting with him this past season, and something that he struggled with more than other areas, was he had a very poor contested catch rate. So 25% contested catch rate. Now, looking back at his last 3 years at Michigan State, that contested catch rate was 56%. But if you look even further, his freshman year, it was down near that 25% as well. So I think we've kind of seen that pattern before with him. And if that's something that he can continue to improve on, I think that could push his ceiling, even higher, albeit a capped ceiling just based on, how crowded the wide receiver room is. But I agree with you guys that he should be the top target.
Yeah. And so I think from a draft strategy perspective on Jayden Reed, what do you guys think of the fact that if you pick him early, then it kind of locks you out of being able to pick any of these other guys that we're going to be talking about here, right? I mean, if you're going to pick him in, the 7th or 8th round, you're going to want that player to be a potential starter. And so would you go in on any of these guys later? Would you avoid him so that you can try and maybe play the value at some of the other picks? What do you guys think about that from a draft strategy perspective?
So for me, looking at the ADP of guys that he's right next to, it's Calvin Ridley, Chris Godwin, Deontay Johnson, and maybe Deontay specifically. I'm pretty confident that his role is just going to be getting peppered with targets. Now, that would make me a little bit more inclined to fade Reed just because someone who we will talk about soon, Dontayvion Wicks, I just think there's a lot of underlying factors that's going to have him really be a breakout candidate and potential star this upcoming year, where at that value, I'm probably going to be attacking him more in drafts versus Jayden Reed. Not to say I'm out on Reed, but like you said, given the value based drafting approach, that's going to be my personal preference for these guys.
Yeah, and Dontayvion Wicks is basically free right now for anybody watching. He's going in Fantasy Pros ADP at 163 overall, so that's basically free. You can kind of get him whenever you want. Strike kind of when the iron's hot. See, I feel like I'm different than the industry because basically everything I've heard on the Packers wide receivers agrees with what you guys just said. I don't really care. I want Reed, right? Like that's the player I want in the wide receiver group. And so if I have to pay a round or two extra to get him and then let those other receivers go to different players, that's what I'm going to be doing. I think that the touchdown upside is really high. Like you said about the contested catch, if it does improve. And I think he has really good rapport with Love, and I expect the snap share to go up. I just think that the sky's the limit here and that you don't see rookies very often get almost 800 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. And the fact that he did it without a full-time role is just I don't see a way that this pick is going to be a bust even in a crowded wide receiver room. And if he does take over as the guy there, he's going to be in every week wide receiver 2. He's going to be a top 20 guy. So okay, we spent a lot of time on Jayden Reed here, so let's get into our second receiver, and that's going to be Christian Watson.
So Christian Watson here, he was hurt for the majority of last year, so we didn't really get to see that classic, second year receiver, and I think he was dealing with a lingering injury on top of that. Now, if he is extending and kind of expanding his route tree, and he's got that speed and that size, I think he's going to be really dangerous. But is he going to take that next step this year? We'll see. He scored 5 receiving touchdowns in his second year, and you look at the stat line: 28 receptions, 422 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So, I mean, for being hurt, he's a very dynamic player. Jordan Love does want to target him, and we saw that from not only this season when he was hurt, but also his rookie year as well. So
yeah, and the NFL did spend $4 million on hamstring research this offseason with Christian Watson, trying to figure out what was causing his hamstring issues, and I don't know that we need to get super into what the research showed, but basically it showed an imbalance of 20% from his left to his right hamstring. And so he's been actively working this offseason to get that disparity to be closer together so that he can kind of try and alleviate some of his hamstring issues. Now, my problem, obviously, it's going to be very clear, and I don't know that it's entirely fair, is I don't want to pick somebody that has this colored of an injury history. Until he shows it, I'm pretty much not going to be drafting him no matter what. I don't want somebody that's only going to play 8 games on my team. You don't know when they're going to come. You don't know if you can start him. Like, it's not like he's a slam dunk start when he's on the field, and so it's just not somebody I want to be dealing with all year. I'd rather spend the pick on somebody that I either think is going to be more consistent or that, take a swing on somebody that I feel like could have much more upside at this pick. Like somebody going right around this spot, is like a running back like Zach Moss, running back like Raheem Mostert, so I just don't know that I'm going to end up getting him anywhere, and I just don't want to deal with the injuries. So, and beyond that, to give the other side of the coin a little bit, guy's a touchdown machine. As a rookie, he had that 5-game window where he scored 8 touchdowns. He only played full health like 4 games last year, and he scored the 5 touchdowns in those 4 games. So like when he's on the field and he's right, there isn't many receivers that are better than him in terms of getting in the end zone. But I can't do it in this wide receiver room. It's going to be more crowded than it ever has been. And if he's not healthy or he's not right, you might not even know going into the game. And then you start him and he goes 4 for 30 and, has a 60% snap share. And then you're just like, then you bench him and then he goes 6 for 90 and 2 touchdowns. I just don't want to deal with that kind of player on my team. So that's why I'm avoiding him. And that's why I kind of present the negative case here.
Yeah, and for
I
me,
think those are all fair points.
Yeah, and he's someone I've always, been high on, even in the pre-draft process, before he was
Definitely.
drafted. But I tend to agree with Trevor here a little bit more. Now, he did say he's got that hamstring up to about 8 to 10% disparity, but you never know. It's like every baseball player says they're in the best shape of their lives in spring training, and they get hurt again
So
by, May
I think
May
he has
15th.
actually had that tested. That's actually been tested. So that's
I'm
not a
not I'm
best
not
shape of your
calling
life type of
BS on
thing.
that. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that with someone with nagging injuries, it is hard to trust. And if you look at if you want to make the pro case, from weeks 5 to 13, he led the team in target share, air yards, yards per route run, et cetera, et cetera. But only in 2 of those weeks did he score more than 11 fantasy points. And he's just kind of that boom bust type player where I don't mind taking him in best ball, but like you said, with trying to gauge on a week to week basis what he's going to bring you, it's tough because he's had some games where he goes 3 for 8 with a couple touchdown drops. Like I think that was like Minnesota week 8 last year. We're like, oh my God, can you just wrangle the ball in? And then the next week he'll have 3 touchdowns because he's truly one of the few players in the NFL that can just out athlete people and score from pretty much anywhere on the field. But it is going to be tough. And like you said, at that ADP, you are paying for it.
Yeah. So I agree with all that too. So, with his current price, I just don't know that he's worth the picks. So, and that's not to say that I wouldn't ever draft him, right? It's just that he'd have to go much later. He'd have to be your third player on your bench, your fourth player on your bench, and then you're willing to take the upside, maybe deal with it. You don't have to rely on him, so it's
Right.
all upside and no downside if you just have to cut him or put him on your IR. So getting
That's the
into the
benefit of
next,
having a three wide receiver league is that maybe he starts for you when another receiver is on bye, but I would kind of consider him as either a wide receiver, low end to middle wide receiver three, or a bench player, just based on everything that you guys just said.
3 wide receivers the
yeah, and
best.
that's a good point, man. Like when you're in bye weeks and you have Watson on your bench and you plug him in, you feel like, hey, maybe he goes off this week and he was worth owning this whole time. So there is some validation or there is some value in having an upside play like that on your bench, but having to count on him, I don't think is something you want to do. All right, so getting into the Packers' third receiver, so we're gonna go out of order in ADP a little bit here, because Dontayvion Wicks is currently getting drafted after Romeo Doubs, who's the next player we're going to talk about. But I think this group is higher on Wicks than the consensus. So his ADP is currently 163. He scored 4 touchdowns last year as a rookie. He had 39 catches, 581 yards. Obviously not great, but a fifth round rookie isn't necessarily somebody that you're counting on. And the fact that we continued to see him get better over the season, we saw his snap share increase. We saw his targets increase over time, and then he had very good last 3 weeks of the year and a very good playoff game when Reed and Watson were both banged up, and they kind of took it to the Cowboys.
He's just someone that I like. He's coming on strong later in the year. I thought it was kind of cool looking at the fact that he has a really good relationship actually with Jayden Reed. They spent like 2 months together in Florida working out together and staying together and getting before even training camp started. So really kind of cool to see. I think he's putting in the work. I think he's got a good relationship with both with the receivers as well as with Jordan Love, and I think things are just looking up for this guy. I'm a big locker room guy, and when people start to when people are really integrating and really getting along, and the team aspect is really starting to become cohesive, I think this is someone who's I think this is someone who's going to really take the next step.
That's a great point about the locker room stuff because the Packers last year obviously got off to a very slow start, and they were never expected to almost get to the Super Bowl, and they really reminded me of those teams that we see every year in baseball where they've got a young core, and after the All-Star break things just kind of click, and it's really fun to see these guys push each other, grow together, win together. So I'm all aboard the Wicks train, and when you look at his route tree, I mean it's almost all green. And the only thing that's in the red is the go route, and he's a 4.62 guy. And that's not going to be, you're not going to blow the top off the defense. And guess who can do that? Christian Watson. So they've got all of these complementary pieces that I think are going to work very well together. And I think Wicks is going to be a guy that, maybe because he was a fifth round pick, he didn't get the same opportunities in training camp. His rookie season, maybe it took a little while to get going, but like you guys both said, most importantly, he finished the year strong. And I think he's going to continue to improve. And I think it's going to be very difficult to keep him off the field because he's also a good run blocker. Like he kind of is just checking all of these boxes that you want from a solid, sturdy wide receiver. And at this ADP, it's hard to talk about the downside because he like you said, he's free. You can, cut him if you need to. So he's someone that I've taken a lot of in best ball drafts toward the end, but I'll be targeting in redraft as well.
And just to kind of expand on what you were saying, Matt, him being a run blocker, that's even a bigger point of him being on the field.
Yeah.
I think I was looking at a stat where he had, and again, his routes were limited, but I mean, about 60% of his routes were on the outside and 30% were in the slot. So,
Hmm.
that flexibility with where he lines up, along with his run blocking, it's going to be hard to keep this guy on the field. And really, a player being on the field is what you want.
Yeah. And
Yeah. I think Jordan Love too. He came out and gave a big vote of confidence to Wicks this past week too. I do want to say before we get too crazy about Wicks and how great and how much he's going to be on the field.
not to mention LaFleur said he reminds him of Devontae Adams in his route running. So
Oh yeah. Just heaping all kinds of praise on this guy, and so I do want to pump the brakes a little bit. Okay, he is fourth on the depth chart, and it's really difficult as a fourth receiver to get on the field, right? So he has all of these qualities that can get him on the field, but unless there's an injury to somebody in front of him, which maybe that's going to be Watson, right? Because that's kind of how it was last year, and Reed got hurt, and so it was kind of like, okay, what do we got here in this fifth round guy? But as long as everybody's healthy, I just don't know that he's going to be on the field that much. So that's why I think he is free, and I agree with you guys that he has qualities to get on the field, but I do want to pump the brakes here that we're not recommending you draft him thinking you have some, potential high-end stud. Like, he's buried on the depth chart, and the chances that you cut him by week 3 for the hottest guy on the waiver wire is much higher than the fact that you're going to have a top 20 receiver. So I do just want to make sure that that's clear, and I think the ADP reflects that, and we're trying to make the pro case because he is buried so deep in ADP that, with your 14th round pick, if you want to take a flyer, that's kind of what we're all suggesting. We all like him as that level of player. In best ball, if the guys go down and, he's shown he can have pretty high upside games, but I do want to just pump the brakes on how excited I am personally about drafting Wicks.
Matt, you
right.
drafting Dontayvion Wicks or Tua?
No Tua this year.
Dude, the Tua hate is just so unwarranted. So out of left field, dude. Tua is
Yeah.
still
Well,
good.
I don't think he's going to get a contract either. I think they're just going to move on, but not
Yeah, we'll
actually.
see about that. Yeah, I don't think so. But yeah, okay. So now moving off of Wicks, we're gonna get into the last player, and this next player too is another reason why I think Wicks is gonna struggle to get on the field a little bit, because Romeo Doubs is somebody that has shown that he can be a very consistent producer. Like he doesn't have blazing speed, but he can still win deep. But where he's super valuable is in the red zone. I mean, he just racks up the touchdowns in the red zone. You have the deep ball with Watson that kind of gives him major touchdown upside. But when they get down inside the 20, it's all Dobbs in terms of what they're looking for. They get down inside the 5 if they're looking to throw. That's why I put this picture here. They got the fade route to Dobbs. And he had 8 touchdowns last year, even though he didn't play the full 17 games, And so I think this is going to cap the upside of the other receivers because of how many touchdowns he's going to be able to score and the fact that he's the best red zone threat of the 4. And, I think it's something that also is going to probably keep Wicks off the field. And it's also why he's getting drafted ahead of Wicks at 132, right? There's not very many wide receivers after like 110 that have 10 touchdown upside, and Dobbs absolutely has 10 touchdown upside as long as he stays healthy. So that's the main case for Dobbs. If you're in a standard league, First of all, update your scoring settings to half PPR or PPR. But if you are in a standard league, Doubs is somebody that you definitely want to target, because the touchdown upside is just is very high, and you can see the half point PPR averages, right? 8.5. That's not great. You're looking for much more upside than that. But again, if somebody else gets hurt and he's on the field, he's staying healthy, I think there's a lot of room here for Dobbs to also improve on that if the wide receiver room does lighten at all during the season.
Yeah, and one thing I was going to note was his large catch radius, but I think the picture kind of speaks for itself there. Yeah, I think Dobbs has just kind of done what the team has asked him to do, and I think he's kind of solid all around. I don't think he, like you said, doesn't really jump out at you crazy amount for the athleticism or things like that. He's not a big yak guy, but again, going back to this team, they've got kind of all these different pieces that really complement each other well. And looking at where he's going around the kind of Josh Palmer, Josh Downs, Jerry Jeudy, got to pay a little bit, but not, a crazy price tag.
Yeah, I think those players that you just mentioned that he's getting drafted around, I think that's a fair price for him. He may not be the number one option, but those guys aren't either. And you've got in him getting the ball thrown from a young, exciting, talented, electric quarterback.
Yeah, and LaFleur is going to call a game based on what the defense gives him too. So, when you're setting your lineups and things like that, look into what these guys, specialize in versus what the opposing defense likes to play, because LaFleur, he's very good at scheming guys open. I think he's been like top 5 in open receiver percentage every year as a head coach. So, like you said, maybe this is a Jordan Love take and just draft him and not have to think about all these other guys, but it'll be fun to watch this year.
Similar to Stroud in that aspect, where there's just weapons all over the field.
Yeah, and maybe we should do a Texans one too.
Yeah, compare all these Texans guys. I think that would be good. I'd like to do that. Yeah. But the other thing to consider about Dobbs, and it was a knock I had against Jayden Reed, right, that he just didn't play very many snaps. Dobbs played a lot of snaps. Dobbs was constantly over 80% of the snaps. So, he missed a couple games and he was banged up the second half of the year, but he is somebody that's going to be on the field if history is to repeat itself. And that's why I say with Wicks, right, it's going to be hard to take somebody off the field that has been starting and is going into their third year. It's not like he's old. It's not like he's overly injury prone or anything. He's a very consistent player for their offense, and he's always out there. So carving out a role for Wicks is either going to have to come from Dobbs or from Reed, or Watson's going to have to get hurt. So I just don't think that Dobbs's role is going to disintegrate or get kind of eaten up by Wicks. So that's why I pumped the brakes on him. In a standard league, I like his touchdown upside. I don't think he has a ton of even weekly upside unless he scores twice. Even if he gets 8 targets, I feel like that's going to be 6 for 50 and maybe a touchdown. So yeah. I just don't have a lot of hope that his yardages are going to be high. He did have a couple good yardage games last year. So, I don't want to say he can't do it. It's just, he had during the regular season, he had his high total was 95. And then he exploded in the playoff game against Dallas. He had 151 in the playoff game. But throughout the season, it's not like he's going to be getting over 100 yards very often. It's not like he's going to be pushing 70 yards very often either. So, that's the capped upside and why I would put him last of this group, I think. Wicks, I feel like if he does get the opportunity, has a little bit more upside, and I'd rather sit that on my bench and hope that something develops there. So that's why I have it ranked this way.